Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and record this for the students at home. We just went a little over time last time, and so we have to see if we can't fit it all in within an hour. So we'll just get going. We'll get going quickly. You guys are living in historic times. I mean, it's just absolutely mind-boggling all of that you're experiencing in just a matter of weeks. The worst phase of the pandemic, the vaccine, kind of getting out there, kind of not. Very important moments that way. Biggest pandemic in 100 years, but then also too, we're in the final days of a presidential administration, and next Wednesday, a week from today, we will inaugurate a new president at 12 noon. Um, and then also too, we are in the middle of what is, whenever it happens, the most dramatic actions that our Congress can take, and that is the impeachment process. Um, to have all that happen within a 1 week's time, I mean, who would have thought less than a week ago that the Capitol, well, a week ago exactly, that the Capitol would have been overrun and taken over, and our government stopped for a short time from doing its job and doing its duty. All that's happened within a week. These are the times that Thomas Paine talked about that try men's souls. The summer soldiers and sunshine patriot will fade away at these moments, but those that can withstand it will stand tall, and then will be remembered in history. This is one of those moments that will be remembered in history for 100 years or more this week. And so let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, what I've got going here and is C-SPAN. Now, C-SPAN is over here where they're actually filming Congress, right? So they just had a procedural vote. I'll explain that in a minute. But this is the actual debate and discussion that's happening right now on the floor. And they just passed a resolution, a rules resolution that just passed 202 to 199 with 32 left to vote. They're voting electronically. So this actual process of impeachment started early this morning, about 3 hours before this class started. We're looking at the, let me escape here really fast and try to get to the lecture. Okay, so there we go. Sorry about this. I should have had this part queued up for you. But here we go. So here we are, lecture 4. we're only in lecture 4, and we've already lived through more history than it would take years to accumulate in just four short lectures. So be patient with yourself. The metaphor, right, of this, you're in the last chapter, you're in the last paragraph of a very big volume. Be a little patient to learn the terms, and I'm going to teach a bunch of terms today, so that you're able to process all this, and then you're able to understand it all and apply it later. And where you'll apply it is in your opinion essays. And now we've already have 2 study guides out there. In the second study guide, some people have actually done it. Now I will do grades again over the weekend. So I'll go back and grade anybody that's turned in the first study guide over the weekend and put those points in. And then those that have started the second study guide, I'll put those in. Remember, the zeros are just me telling you that I'm grading it now. And so some of people just wait till they see a 0 before they start, which is fine. But at least you know the impact on your grade. And when you do these things, you'll see your grades pop up really, really fast. So even though it says maybe F in your grade book, it's not an F. You haven't turned in that assignment yet. And when you do, your grade will pop right up to where it should be. You get to actually choose the grade you want. And if you're willing to work hard, do all the study guides, you're going to be able to get the grade you're looking for. Now, what just happened early this morning is that they had to vote rules in on how they're going to conduct the debate today on the impeachment articles. So when they bring a law, and this is a resolution it's called, when they bring a resolution or a law to the floor of the House to be voted on, they have to allow time for people to read it. That's why they didn't do it Monday. They proposed it. It's taken till today for everybody to have a chance to read it and respond and to write the rules of the debate. Now, the House of Representatives is so big that they have to limit the time of each person. So the members from Utah, for example, might get 3 minutes. Otherwise, it'd go on forever. You can't just have every member of the House get up and talk forever. In the Senate, they have unlimited time debate. They don't restrict the time very often. But here, there's kind of strict limits, and then it usually goes back and forth between the two political parties. And that's what was being voted on and apparently just passed, because we just saw those votes as I looked at the live feed. So they haven't actually started the impeachment itself. What we have, though, is a nonpartisan term. This term nonpartisan means non-political. C-SPAN is a good place to go to watch Congress. It was set up, congressional, I don't know what the SPAN part is, but they record everything that's said in Congress. And they turn that over to, in some cases, Smithsonian Institute for Historical Review, and also the Library of Congress. And so this is a record, a visual record, an audio record of everything that takes place in Congress. And so not a word is lost. And so that's a good place to just get the raw information and the data, and it's nonpartisan. It's not Democrat, it's not Republican. A lot of the news stations and whatever that are out there right now, they have a spin on it. They have an opinion, they have a bias, right? And so they're spending most of the time talking back and forth, about this and that. And it can be informative and it can be interesting, but by the same token, everyone has a bias. You have a bias, I have a bias, everybody does. It's just human, right? If you're a human being, you're going to have certain opinions, right? So let's talk about that. When you express yourself, your opinion matters. Everybody has an opinion or a bias or a belief about something, and you ought to have a chance to express that. Now, in this case, because it's an academic class, I want you to try to back up your beliefs, your opinions, your thoughts with facts and data. And every one of these is great. It's part of your First Amendment right to peaceably express yourself, right? And I have read some of these already. I often tell the students ever since I've been at UCAS, people talk about how good your math skills are and your writing skills, your biology skills and your science skills and whatever. But I think the number one strength at UCAS is your writing. Your writing is amazing. The thing I look forward to the most is to read these opinion pieces, and they're all over the place. Everybody has a different opinion. Everybody has a different side to it. And you can call it bias if you want, but what I call it is informed thought. And you have your thoughts, you inform them with information you might have researched, things you've learned, and you get to express yourself. And this is really important, because if you're going to go out in the world, if you're going to, for example, run for Congress or whatever, you've got to be able to express yourself with reason and with thought. And the best way to learn to do that is through a written form. So I'm real proud of the ones I've seen so far. They're just really good. And I can't wait to read all of your opinions on that second study guide over the weekend. All right, so that's kind of important. Another nonpartisan group, C-SPAN is nonpartisan, is the military. The military, not going to be involved in anything political, right? In fact, the National Guard, kind of a subset of the military run by the states and the District of Columbia, they are now in the nation's Capitol building. They didn't find anywhere to sleep yet. I mean, they're just in here preserving and protecting and getting ready for next week for the inauguration of a new president. And it must be quite an emotional thing for some of these military folks and then in the Guard to be able to wander the halls and see some of the great paintings and the statues and the statuary hall and the great symbolism of our Capitol. And here's a group of our great, wonderful National Guards folks looking at this very famous painting of the Constitution being pulled together. It's just really an amazing thing. All right, also too, who's nonpartisan, is the Capitol Hill Police. The Capitol Hill Police is there to protect that building and to protect the lives of everyone in it. Now, there's about 2,000 that are hired to do this, but on that day, there were about 500 that were on duty. And I've been wanting to do this since the very beginning because we owe them a lot. The courage that they showed was unbelievable. And this quickly got out of hand and they were able to save lives. Do you know how phenomenal it is that they were able to somehow get out every member of the House and the Senate and Mike Pence, the vice president, and their families to safety before terrible, terrible things could have happened? And one instance kind of kept haunting me. I mean, there's one visual. We watched this officer right here, right, who is at a doorway, and there's a bunch of a mob basically coming in. Lots of people. He's there alone, and he retreats up the stairs. And I'm thinking, is he just running from the mob? And I'm thinking, yeah, I'd get out of there too. But that wasn't what was happening. He was leading them away from entrances to the floor of the Senate. And he was calling for backup, and he led them to a particular place where officers could come. But this moment was the moment that turns him into a national hero. People are saying the Congress should give him the Congressional Gold Medal, because as he's coming up these stairs with this mob following him, he's standing. See, this doorway and this hallway was open to the Senate. They were still trying to get senators out. They needed 2 or 3 more minutes to get the senators out. He at first, you can kind of see he moves to defend that door, but then he thinks, wait a minute, and he comes over to the other side, pushes one of the protesters, gets him mad at him, and gets him to chase him down the other hall so they don't go into the hall of the Senate. They would get there later and storm that, but by that time, everybody had been evacuated. So 2 minutes, they're saying, that could have saved the Republic. Now, I'm going to give you 2 versions of this, because one is kind of a narrated version. And then I'm going to show you the actual footage of the reporter who was up here, who heard about the ruckus from his phone, and he ran down the stairs and he caught this moment. And the reason I want you to see this is because, first of all, it's dramatic, but also it shows you the power of smartphones these days to collect evidence and to show us what really happened. Because this could have, in former times, before smartphones, nobody would have ever known this even happened. So this heroic moment is just something we should celebrate right now, of this brave officer, no question about that. Let's see if I can click this link and get there. Now I'm going
Sadly, the person who's running executive.
Okay, I'm going to jump ahead because I actually queued this up for you to save time. Okay, so here is the footage that's narrated, and it'll go slower. So here we go.
From the Senate chambers, where the full Senate, including the vice president, were inside. You can see as they reach the top of the stairs, he looks over, and in between those 2 chairs is the Senate chambers. He pushes one of the protesters to get him to follow him away from the door, eventually leading them away from the Senate chamber. And here is new video.
Okay, now I show that because this is one of those bits that I can show you that's not really violent. Some of the things that we're going to show next are just, I've got people with sensitivity toward this kind of thing, and I'm not going to go there. But I will show this act of heroism. This is the actual footage from the camera of the reporter that witnessed it with his phone. Hang on to your seats here for a second. This is dramatic stuff. He's going to see him run down the stairs and then see this situation. Here we go. And then backup arrives. Wow, that will be a moment that will live in American history forever. The courage of the officer, his quick thinking. This guy's name is, let's go ahead, Eugene Goodman, and they're already talking about give him the Congressional Gold Medal for that heroism. And the heroism of those 500 police officers standing in harm's way and keeping bad things from happening to our elected officials in the most sacred building in our country when it comes to our Constitution and our democracy and our republic. That was inspiring. And wow, I'm just glad we have something very positive to show you to start the day, and this action of this hero. These actions of these officers saved lives, and not just lives, but the lives of the very people we elect to represent us in our government. Now, you hear a lot of people say, oh, I hate politics. Politics is terrible, whatever. Okay, fine. But guess what? We're all involved in politics in one way or another, right? I mean, in our daily lives, we have to interact. What's politics? Let's define it. Before we, use words and throw them out there as being good or bad or evil, let's define them first. Politics, well, this is how we make decisions in a democratic republic. It's how we make decisions is through politics. Politics includes voting, freedom of speech. We have members of Congress. We have all this process set up to make decisions. The term politics is defined this way: is a set of activities associated with making decisions in groups or in other forms of power relationships between individuals. That's politics. Political science is the academic study of politics, is referred to as political science, right? Poli-sci. By the way, this word comes from Greek. And so many of the terms we use for our politics, like democracy, for example, and dictator and tyranny and all that, come from ancient Greek vocabulary. So we have a whole unit where we're going to go and talk about the terms that the Greeks taught us, because they studied government. They studied political science, and they saw politics as a way to do things in a nonviolent way. Now, I left this up here, but there's other great thinkers down through history. One of them was John Locke, and he talks about our natural rights need to be enforced by a government created with consent. In other words, if we didn't have a government, somebody, a bully, could take our rights away from us. But with a government, all of our rights can be preserved, right? What's the alternative to politics? The alternative to politics and good government is the violence, anarchy, mobocracy, or even war. Two countries negotiating, right? Rather than going to war is politics. It's important. Another guy we're going to talk about is Hobbes. He was another philosopher. These two are English philosophers about the time of the American Revolution, very influential on our writing of our Constitution. He said, without good government, we will have no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger and violent death. The life of man would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And that last line is one of the most famous lines coming from Hobbes, who was a very influential political scientist. Wrote a book called The Leviathan, which we'll talk about. This guy wrote the second treatise on government, which we'll also talk about. Now, where do these rules come from? Where do these laws come from? Where does our government come from? It comes from the Constitution, which lays out the rules. We call that the rule of law. These are basically just the rules of how we're going to conduct ourselves in a civil society, where we're civilized with each other, where we have civilized debates instead of anarchy and chaos. When we talk about certain inalienable rights, like Locke talked about, like life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, well, to secure these rights, rather than having some bully down the street take them away from us, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's us, that's you and me. And we do that through our votes. We can talk to our lawmakers. I sent an email last night to my lawmaker, giving my opinions on everything that's going on, and that person's going to vote today, right? John Curtis, he's our congressman from this part of the Valley. The Constitution is the overriding laws that lay out the rules of our American Democratic Republic. This is what we mean by the rule of law, with the consent of we the people. So I know that's a lot of theory, but over time, Congress has passed laws that define certain categories of criminality, right? Now, the importance is that with this invasion of our capital, this attack on our democracy, without these smartphones, the evidence would have been a lot harder to gather. But with them, it's really easy to find out who were the perpetrators, who were the people that were leading the charge, and do they have a criminal record and all that kind of stuff. They've already opened up almost 200 cases already, and about 80 or so have already been arrested for some crime or another. Now, I need to add a group. Remember we talked yesterday about that there were 3 groups, right? That you can't, say everybody in this crowd and everything was bad people. They weren't. Let's talk about this group, the majority. They came for a peaceful protest. And that's totally okay. They believe in the First Amendment, do it peacefully. When the violence started, they just walked away and said, I'm not part of that. And that was the majority. Now, there's another group I'm going to add to this that, until somebody pointed out in some footage, there were actual people who didn't want to see this turn violent, who tried to pull back some of the mob away from the police to protect the police that interfered with the attack on the police and tried to stop that. And that's another group, tried to stop the violence. You got to give those folks a lot of credit, because that would be a very tense moment, and your decisions at that moment would be difficult to make. But here is a group that made the other decision. We're going to follow this faction of conspirators, and they got caught up in the moment. For example, that one congressman from a state level legislature in West Virginia, who was happily filming the whole thing and followed everybody in. Sorry, hit that thing. Followed him in the room. He so regrets that. He resigned from the legislature in West Virginia and apologized to everybody. But his phone has the evidence of everybody around him, including those that were in the lead, causing the real chaos. And we call this group, of course, the faction of conspirators. And it will turn out, I believe, to be, this is a personal opinion, but it will be hundreds, not thousands, of instigators, of conspirators. So we have to define what that means. Let's take a look at the laws of the United States right now and these different levels of crime. All right, let's start with conspiracy. Conspiracy is the biggie right now. Well, murder is the most important, of course. That one officer, there's now 2 officers that have died. So the death toll's up to 6. Well, a conspiracy is a criminal law in the legal code. A conspiracy is an agreement between 2 or more persons to commit a crime at some time in the future. That's a conspiracy. Now, there was a good example that happened several months ago, where a group of thugs were plotting to kidnap the governor of Michigan and hold her hostage, or worse. And the FBI had been investigating this group, and they were able to infiltrate it, and they stopped it before a terrible thing happened. And they were going through all the motions. They were doing surveillance on her home. They were making bombs. They were, they were collecting material. They were practicing. That's a conspiracy. A conspiracy of 2 or more people to commit a crime at some point in the future. So there are conspirators out there. They planned this. They planned to go inside. They planned, in some cases, to take hostages. You saw the zip ties. Now, there's a very low-level crime, though, of trespass. Now, what's happened, it's real easy to prove trespass, because you have to have evidence for all of this, right? So with the phone, did you trespass? Did you cross that threshold to go into the Capitol when you knew you weren't supposed to and the officers were trying to stop you? Well, that trespass is a crime. It's a low-level misdemeanor. But unlawful entry into a person's land or property or secure location, like a school. Nobody gets into UCAS unless you go through the main office first, right? But military bases, you just don't wander onto a military base anytime you want. And you don't go to the nation's capital without permission. And you got to go through metal detectors and all that kind of stuff to make sure everything's safe and secure, especially since 9/11. Vandalism is another one. There's going to be people, there visibly will be seen vandalizing. Again, that's not a big felony, but it's an important crime. And you can arrest people for this and hold them until you can find further evidence of this, assault. We saw a lot of assault. That is an act, criminal or tortious, that's a term in the law, that threatens physical harm to a person. Now, this can be an actual attack physically, or it can even be verbal. Okay, so in harm to a person, so the harm is the key, physical harm. You threaten that, whether the harm is actual harm is done, is either verbal or physical. I had an incident in my life. I had a roommate who had some issues and was on a certain medication for that, manic depressive. Fine guy, just great guy, to hang out with and be around. But he decided to go off his medicine. Somehow he, I don't know, believed in his mind that he could somehow qualify for the space program. I don't know where that came from, but he went off his meds because he knew he couldn't pass the test unless he, never mind, it was a long story. But he just went off and started threatening people. We literally had to get between him and another roommate. And for some reason, he decided he wanted to hit him with a guitar. Well, we all went outside of the apartment. Obviously, he followed us out, and then he's kind of ranting and running up and down the street a little bit. And we're just kind of trying to get everybody on the sidewalk away and get everybody to safety. When of course, we called the police. Police came, and there was old dial phones back in those days. We didn't have smartphones. We had to dial from apartments, you know. So we yelled up to the apartment, "Call the police!" And we called the police on those old dial phones, you know. Anyway, the police officer got there, and the person quieted down immediately, because I guess this had happened before. And this officer knew this person. And the officer just started to talk to him gently. But then the officer knew what was going to happen because of his issues and not being on his medicine. He just launched into swearing at the officer. As soon as he launched those swear words, the police officer immediately cuffed him and took him into custody. Now, he didn't go to jail per se or to court. They actually just remanded him to treatment center. About 2 weeks later, he was back out, normal as can be, back on his medicine. But that verbal threat is part of assault as well. It's not, you know, at the same level, and won't have the same level of punishment as actual physical, but there were so many people who used flagpoles with the American flag to hit police officers with, pushed them, shoved them. Well, you saw. All right, now there's also illegal possession of firearms and explosives. You just can't take these. Remember that one guy had 12 Molotov cocktails? And then, of course, someone, if they have the visual evidence and if they can get some people to do that, we're going to find out who murdered that officer. And that is, of course, huge. Now, all that has been determined by law. It's all written into laws. Now, why do we worry about factions, small groups? If it's hundreds, not thousands, why are we worried about them? Because factions can really stir up some trouble. Let me give you the example of the Soviet Union in 1917. In 1917, World War I was a disaster for Russia. There was a revolt against the government. It was the Tsar. He was like the ultimate king. He was an absolute monarch. They overthrew him, and there was a kind of a democratic government there for a while. But then a small faction called the Bolshevik Party, and they were just a small faction, managed to stir up enough followers that they overthrew that government in a coup and established the Soviet Union and created one of the most repressive regimes in its government, right? Regimes in world history, and the Russian people were subject to 90 years of subjugation. And that was a small group, the Bolsheviks. So that's kind of important to remember. We take factions seriously, and we know that rules matter. Rules matter, especially when you have partisanship, where you have two political parties, they have very different views and opinions, and they're going to push against each other. And this could not be good. So we create what we call civilized discourse. We create rules. And so that's why the Rules Committee said, here's the rules for the debate. They debated the rules. Now they're going to go and actually apply those rules throughout the day and start the impeachment process. You guys have seen this. You know people that all you do is bring up certain topics and they go ballistic. The steam comes out of their ears. They're all angry. They turn red-faced, and they're so angry at whatever politician or whatever thing. And this is what we call intense partisanship. We've got to calm this down. We got to calm this down. Like those folks that you said, hey, here's my buddy. He's pushing against a police officer. Stop it and pull him back. Calm down, man. That's it. Look, we have to, I love this, Dr. Spock, live long and prosper, people. We have to use our intellect at this point. We have to decide things in a civil manner. We have to take the temperature down and have a reasoned discussion and debate. That's what courts are all about. Is you go through the evidence and then you go through the process and you follow the rules so that it doesn't spin out of control. And that's exactly what just happened. The impeachment rules, as of like an hour ago, or less than that, actually, they proposed them in the morning. Here they're calling the House to session. The clerk reads the rules out, and then they start a debate. And each side got 30 minutes. And so they would go back and forth between different lawmakers on both sides and debate, and then they had their vote. And so they voted in the rules, and now they're going to start this debate. Now, it's still partisan, right? I mean, right now we have two sides, but here's the thing, right? In the last impeachment, all the Republicans in the House voted with the incumbent president. All the Democrats voted against. That's what we call partisanship. where nobody in the political party system is switching sides because they've had their conscience says, hey, I need to vote with the other side. That didn't happen in the last impeachment, right? What we need now is what we call bipartisanship, and it's the most important word I'm going to teach you today. The Constitution was written in such a way that you can't really get anything done unless you can get both sides involved, at least a little bit. And this is where basically here's Uncle Sam saying, I want you to compromise. The Constitution was written to force compromise between different groups. Nobody gets everything they want. Now, last time in the Senate, when the impeachment goes to the Senate for trial and potential removal, all the Republicans voted with the incumbent president. All the Democrats voted against, but one. Only one senator, period, crossed over and made it bipartisan by voting with the Democrats to remove the president, and that was Mitt Romney of Utah. And I'm going to play you his speech at the end. I hope we have time to hear the whole thing. Now, Mitch McConnell, of course, the last time was, didn't want removal, and he, basically his members, he coached them. They call it whipping. There's an old term, to whip the vote. If I got your vote, are you going to vote with the incumbent? You're going to do that. This time he's not doing that. He's allowing the members of his group, the Republicans, to vote their conscience. See, that's different than last time, a year ago. In fact, what you have to understand is that Mitch McConnell, the head of the Republicans in the Senate, and Nancy Pelosi, they've worked together for dozens of years. They're part of a team called the Gang of eight top leaders of the House and Senate that get all of the national security briefings the same way the president does. They have to make some decisions just among those eight. They've been working together for a long time. They may differ a lot, if we look back at this chart, but by the same token, they've worked together in a bipartisan way for decades. And Mitch McConnell, in this last one, in the Board of Education for UCAS wanted us to share this with you with Mitch McConnell's speech. And I played you a clip of it before, but I'm going to read to you a little bit more of it. He said this vote was the most important vote he'd taken, and he's been in Congress for 30 years. He voted for Mitt Romney talked about that, how Mitch McConnell said this was his most important vote. And here is Mitch McConnell, the Republican. Now, why am I going on and on and on about Republicans? Because I'm going to go one more slide ahead. Nothing will happen unless the Republicans join in. I mean, you can't just do it from one side, right? So this Mitch McConnell statement is really important. He said this failed, and this was after the chaos, and they went to vote and certify the election of Joe Biden. This failed attempt to obstruct Congress, this failed insurrection, only underscores how crucial the task before us is for our republic. He goes on to say, after the disruption and the siege, our nation was founded precisely so that the free choice of the American people is what shapes our self-government and determines the destiny of our nation. That's pretty powerful. And he said, if anybody who loses an election can contest it and say, no, I want to win. Our democracy would go into a death spiral. We played you that portion. So we're going to see if there's some bipartisanship, if somebody crosses this bridge, right? And the reason it's improbable that the Senate will remove, remember that the House can only accuse, and then they give that to the Senate, and the Senate holds the trial, is because you have to get 67 votes. And so here's what happened in the past. Now, censorship they could do tomorrow. They could just censure the president and say, this was wrong, and we're calling you on it, and we're making this mark in history, like they did to Andrew Jackson when he violated the law a couple of times, actually. But the first to be impeached was Andrew Johnson. Now, he was impeached, but not removed. He was saved by one vote. One senator from Tennessee, his home state of Tennessee, went and visited with him, and he was remorseful. The president was remorseful, and said, look, I'm not going to do those kinds of things again. Please spare me. And he did. He went, and one vote saved Johnson from being thrown out. The next president, Nixon, was not going to be so lucky. The votes were in the Senate, 67, more than that. It would have been closer to 80 something, to remove him. And so he resigns first before they actually voted on impeachment. So they were kind of in the stage we're in today, right? They were debating the impeachment. And before they could debate the impeachment and complete the vote, he resigned first. So technically he was not impeached, but he would have been impeached and removed. That's why he resigned first. The next president, Clinton, he was impeached but not removed either. And the vote in the Senate wasn't even close, even though it was a Republican-controlled Senate. And in the last impeachment, the incumbent president was impeached but not removed. And I don't know that it's really mathematically possible, given the makeup of the Senate, that that this will be any different than that. But the difference is there are Republicans now that will join the Democrats in a bipartisan way to vote against the president. It won't just be Mitt Romney by himself. By the way, when Mitt Romney did that, he became the first senator in history to vote against a president of his own political party. He will go down in history as one of the truly great senators, by the way, of all time. And you heard one of his speeches. I'm playing another one here, and I think well, maybe you'll agree with me on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's where his destiny lies. Now let's get to the Constitution itself. It's Article 2, Section 4 that lays out this impeachment process. The president, vice president, and all civil officers in the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for, that's the House part, and conviction of, that's the Senate part, of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So when you hear high crimes and misdemeanors, that's where it's coming from. Article 2, Section 4. By the way, you might want to make a note of that. It'll be in the study guide. You can look it up right here and answer this question. And in the case of presidential impeachment and trials, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will preside. He's kind of he runs the show, but he doesn't have a vote. We'll show you that later. The Constitution then requires a 2/3 vote, so 67 senators to convict. And the penalty now is important, is just removal from office. This is not a criminal investigation. That can happen later. People who are impeached and removed from office can be then tried in regular courts for regular crimes, like the list of crimes I showed you earlier. So that's to be remembered. So the court system's separate, and they have their own thing going. Now with Nixon, let's go back. Nixon had a very famous senator, Barry Goldwater, a Republican, who counted the votes, and he was disgusted with Nixon's behavior. And he basically went over with another senator named Rhodes, and they visited with the president and said he was doomed, that he was going to be removed. And this is one of the great acts of any senator in history. Going over there. Is Mitt Romney the new Barry Goldwater? I don't know. But that's what caused Nixon to resign suddenly. And then he gets on his, in the helicopter. For some reason, he was smiling at this few people that showed up to wish him off, and gave his famous salute. He always would raise both hands and put fingers in the air like that. It was kind of his thing. Anyway, he gets in the helicopter and heads back to California. President Ford then took over. And we'll talk more about that story. And he urges a time of healing. And so that was really important. Okay, what's changed overnight? What changed overnight is that Mitch McConnell is going to allow his members to vote their conscience and not try to encourage them to vote a certain way, like he did last time. So lots changed in a year. I've got this from 2 separate sources. So this is important academically, right? You can't just put something up there. You don't have 2 sources. Fox News, which is generally very supportive of the president. And then you have this source here, and this was The Guardian, right? It's a paper in England. Okay, so here it is from the Fox News source. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell supports Democrats' move to initiate impeachment proceedings against the president and is, quote, done and, quote, furious with him, sources familiar told Fox News. Let's read a more detailed account in The Guardian. Senator Mitch McConnell believes Donald Trump has committed impeachable offenses, the report says. The Senate Majority Leader has told associates that he's happy Democrats have moved to impeach Mr. Trump, as it will make it easier to rebuild the Republican Party, according to a report in the New York Times that was, by the way, entered into the congressional record this morning. The House Democrats plan to vote Wednesday, that's today, to impeach the outgoing president for an unprecedented second time. And basically now we're going to see it's going to go to trial, and we'll see what happens in the Senate. The president will face the charges in the law of inciting violence against the country. So that's different. And what's really different is no Republican in the House voted with the president last time. Now, though, the highest ranked Republican in the House, Liz Cheney, announced yesterday she's going to vote for removal, or excuse me, for impeachment. Remember, the House can only vote for impeachment. This is Liz Cheney. Her father was a vice president, Republican vice president, very famous one, vice president of the United States for George W. Bush. She's from Wyoming, one of the most Republican states in the country. She's a very powerful member of Congress, and I'm going to read it to you here. Ready? Liz Cheney, the third highest ranking Republican leader in the House, has said she will vote to impeach the president on Wednesday as a growing cohort of Republicans backs efforts to hold Donald Trump accountable for inciting attacks. Right now, 5 have come out. Republicans have said they're going to vote with the Democrats. 5. That didn't happen last time. In a strongly worded statement released on Tuesday, Cheney, a representative from Wyoming and the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, said that Trump had, quote, summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the president. I will vote to impeach the president. And then she also accused him that he could have stopped the violence by calling the National Guard immediately. He didn't do it. It was Mike Pence that later in the day had to do that. Incitement to insurrection is what basically is happening here. So we're at one of those times when we're actually learning from Roman history. What the Romans were really good about is they had senators that learned to speak, that had trained in it. And they would have these debates and discussions. And one of the most famous who opposed the tyranny of the Caesar and the takeover of Roman government by a dictator, right, was Cicero. And Cicero was widely read, one of the most widely read people by the founding fathers. A book of his speeches had been published at the time, even though they were about 2,000 years old. Right? History, he said, is the witness that testifies to the passing of time. Really, truly does. You will never forget this week. It illuminates reality, visualizes memory. Will we ever forget what we saw this week? Provides guidance in daily life and brings us the tidings of antiquity. And your grandchildren will be asking you about this for their reports in school. The first time this incumbent president was impeached, he was accused of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, which is the same thing Nixon was being charged with. Here's Nancy Pelosi leading that. Again, making history, the only Republican, only person of the same political party as the person being impeached, crossed over that bipartisan divide and voted for removal. And in this speech, he makes history.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Constitution is at the foundation of our republic's success, and we each strive not to lose sight of our promise to defend it. The Constitution established the vehicle of impeachment that has occupied both houses of our Congress these many days. We have labored to faithfully execute our responsibilities to it. We have arrived at different judgments, but I hope we respect each other's good faith. The allegations made in the articles of impeachment are very serious. As a senator juror, I swore an oath before God to exercise impartial justice. I am profoundly religious. My faith is at the heart of who I am. I take an oath before God as enormously consequential. I knew from the outset that being tasked with judging the president, the leader of my own party, would be the most difficult decision I have ever faced. I was not wrong. The House managers presented evidence supporting their case, and the White House counsel disputed that case. In addition, the president's team presented 3 defenses. First, that there could be no impeachment without a statutory crime. Second, that the Biden's conduct justified the president's actions. And third, that the judgment of the president's actions should be left to the voters. Let me first address those 3 defenses. The historic meaning of the words high crimes and misdemeanors, the writings of the founders, and my own reasoned judgment convinced me that a president can indeed commit acts against the public trust that are so egregious that while they are not statutory crimes, they would demand removal from office. To maintain that the lack of a codified and comprehensive list of all the outrageous acts that a president might conceivably commit renders Congress powerless to remove such a president defies reason. The president's counsel also notes that Vice President Biden appeared to have a conflict of interest when he undertook an effort to remove the Ukrainian prosecutor general. If he knew of the exorbitant compensation his son was receiving from a company actually under investigation, the vice president should have recused himself. While ignoring a conflict of interest is not a crime, it is surely very wrong. With regards to Hunter Biden, taking excessive advantage of his father's name is unsavory, but also not a crime. Given that in neither the case of the father nor the son was any evidence presented by the president's counsel that a crime had been committed, the president's insistence that they be investigated by the Ukrainians is hard to explain other than as a political pursuit. There's no question in my mind that were their names not Biden, the president would never have done what he did. The defense argues that the Senate should leave the impeachment decision to the voters. While that logic is appealing to our democratic instincts, it is inconsistent with the Constitution's requirement that the Senate, not the voters, try the president. Hamilton explained that the founders' decision to invest senators with this obligation rather than leave it to the voters was intended to minimize, to the extent possible, the partisan sentiments of the public at large. So the verdict is ours to render under our Constitution. The people will judge us for how well and faithfully we fulfill our duty. The grave question the Constitution tasks senators to answer is whether the president committed an act so extreme and egregious that it rises to the level of a high crime and misdemeanor. Yes, he did. The president asked a foreign government to investigate his political rival. The president withheld vital military funds from that government to press it to do so. The president delayed funds for an American ally at war with Russian invaders. The president's purpose was personal and political. Accordingly, the president is guilty of an appalling abuse of public trust. What he did was not perfect. No, it was a flagrant assault on our electoral rights, our national security, and our fundamental values. Corrupting an election to keep oneself in office is perhaps the most abusive and destructive violation of one's oath of office that I can imagine. In the last several weeks, I've received numerous calls and texts. Many demanded in their words that I stand with the team. I can assure you that that thought has been very much on my mind. You see, I support a great deal of what the president has done. I voted with him 80% of the time. But my promise before God to apply impartial justice required that I put my personal feelings and political biases aside. Were I to ignore the evidence that has been presented and disregard what I believe my oath and the Constitution demands of me for the sake of a partisan end, it would, I fear, expose my character to history's rebuke and the censure of my own conscience. I'm aware that there are people in my party and in my state who will strenuously disapprove of my decision, and in some quarters, I will be vehemently denounced. I'm sure to hear abuse from the president and his supporters. Does anyone seriously believe that I would consent to these consequences other than from an inescapable conviction that my oath before God demanded it of me? I sought to hear testimony from John Bolton, not only because I believed he could add context to the charges, but also because I hoped that what he might say could raise reasonable doubt and thus remove from me the awful obligation to vote for impeachment. Like each member of this deliberative body, I love our country. I believe that our Constitution was inspired by Providence. I'm convinced that freedom itself is dependent on the strength and vitality of our national character. As it is with each senator, my vote is an act of conviction. We've come to different conclusions, fellow senators, but I trust we have all followed the dictates of our conscience. I acknowledge that my verdict will not remove the president from office. The results of this Senate court will in fact be appealed to a higher court, the judgment of the American people. Voters will make the final decision, just as the president's lawyers have implored. My vote will likely be in the minority in the Senate. But irrespective of these things, with my vote, I will tell my children and their children that I did my duty to the best of my ability, believing that my country expected it of me. I will only be one name among many, no more, no less, to future generations of Americans who look at the record of this trial. They will note merely that I was among the senators who determined that what the president did was wrong, grievously wrong. We are all footnotes at best in the annals of history, but in the most powerful nation on earth, the nation conceived in liberty and justice, that distinction is enough for any citizen. Thank you, Mr. President.
And of course, when he says Mr. President, who he's talking to is the Supreme Court Chief Justice, who's acting as the president of the Senate at that moment. That's one of the great speeches in American history right there. You just heard it. And it was emotional, heartfelt, and yeah, I mean, everything came true. He was, many people didn't like how he voted and expressed that. That's their right, under as long as it's peaceable. But basically, now we have a situation where we have a modern day Cicero. The Romans mastered the ability to debate and discuss and do it in a logical way. And Mitt Romney, of course, exemplified that there in that speech. Now we have this president will be the first president to be impeached twice within about 13 months. And the charge is incitement. And there's some other little nuances in there that I've read about that we'll talk about later. But I'm going to draw this to a close now. And I think that's a perfect place to end with that great speech. And there's a lot of great speeches. So hopefully you can follow the coverage today in your news sources and learn all you can about this process.